Now, one of the common frustrations that I hear from employers and parents, educators, is that they feel like they're often dealing with a generation of young people coming through who are constantly challenging the process, constantly undermining authority, pushing the envelope, questioning the status quo. Of course, if there is a question that defines the young generation of today, it is the question, why? Now, of course, every generation of young people throughout history has asked the question why, but this group, this young group coming through, do so with greater frequency and greater intentionality than any generation previous. Now let's look at what is behind this question of why, because even though it's highly annoying, it comes from a very valid place. So to give you a bit of history, let's rewind a little bit. If we look historically at, for instance, notions such as truth and morality, ethics, historically the foundational assumption in life and society was that truth, for instance, is absolute. This idea that in life there are things such as right and wrong, black and white, and that informed how older generations approached all sorts of things in life. They may not have necessarily challenged the process or the status quo because there was an assumption that the way to do things was just the right way to do things. Now, when it comes to this generation interacting with younger people, there is a dead giveaway, one word, that is the indication that you still have this sort of truth is absolute, black and white mentality. And can I urge you to become aware of how many times you use this one word every day in your interaction with the younger generation, because I guarantee you there is no word that will elicit the why question more frequently. Okay, and it's the word should. Be aware of how many times you use that one word every day. Because for older generations, the word should is an entirely appropriate word to use, because if something is correct and it's right and it's proper and it's ethical and true, and everyone else agrees, then you should respond accordingly. I mean, you should dress a certain way, think a certain way, act in a certain manner in certain social settings. You see, in the workplace, you should arrive for your shift at work a certain number of minutes before that shift begins. Not because you're paid to be there early, but just because you should be there early. Now, of course, you say the word should to the younger generation today. The first question they ask is the question of why. Now, what's interesting again is what is behind this. Because Gen Y don't ask the question why just because they want to challenge you or be a nuisance. They ask the question why. This young group asks it so frequently because they have been raised in an era with a very different mentality to the traditional mentality of truth is absolute. They've been raised in an era where they've been told, they've been trained to think that truth is relative. Therefore, it's not about black and white, but just shades of grey. So you say the word should, they ask the question why, and what they mean by the question of why is this. Okay, what's the perception that's led you, as my parent or my employer or my teacher, what's led you to make that judgment? Now, of course, guess what? The way you respond to the question of why from this postmodern relativist generation, okay, the way you respond is critical. If you dismiss the why question from young people, dismissals normally sound like, they ask why, you say because I said so. If you dismiss the question of why, I guarantee you engagement with this group is going to be the furthest thing from your reality. And so the challenge you face is, how do you engage with a generation who are constantly challenging the process? To realize that when they ask why, they're not trying to undermine your authority or challenge the status quo. They want to understand what is the perception that has led to it. What I find working with many of my clients is if you answer the why question respectfully and intelligently, they'll respond really well. In fact, if you're trying to get this generation to, comply with or go along with a series of expectations and rules, if they ask why and you give them a genuine answer, that is probably all they will need to go, okay, I get it, happy to jump on board. So it's important we understand what drives the why question, but also how we respond.